Hi, I'm Melissa Parsons from the University of New England. In this video, I'll take you through how to interpret the different aspects of the index. So first up, it's important to understand the structure of the index and what each level says about disaster resilience. So there are 8 factors of disaster resilience: social character, economic capital, emergency services, planning in the built environment, community capital, information access, social and community engagement, and governance and leadership. So these factors are the dimensions of disaster resilience that combine to form coping capacity and adaptive capacity. Coping capacity is the means by which people and organisations have and can use their available resources and abilities to face adverse consequences. Adaptive capacity is the arrangements and processes that enable adjustment through learning, adaptation, and transformation. And coping and adaptive capacity are formed into an overall disaster resilience index. There's also another couple of background things to note about the index, because these really set the boundaries of how the index is interpreted. First, the index assesses the capacity for disaster resilience, not observed resilience following any one natural hazard event. The index considers the system of social, economic, institutional and governance factors that need to be in place for disaster resilience. And it forms those into an index to show how well these 8 structural factors work together to support or constrain the capacities of communities to be able to cope with, absorb and adapt to natural hazards. Now, secondly, the index is not about individuals or their behaviours. We didn't ask people about their experiences with hazards or what they might do to prepare for, respond to and recover from natural hazard events. The index is an assessment of the structural capacities for disaster resilience that sit around communities. Even though individuals can act in many different ways, these capacities can form sometimes quite invisible supports or constraints on disaster resilience in a community. What the index does is to uncover what these supports and constraints are and where they occur around Australia. Thirdly, the resolution of the index is the Statistical Area Level 2 or SA2 division of the Australian Bureau of Statistics. We assessed disaster resilience in 2,084 SA2s around Australia. So in the index, a community is a place-based community defined geographically by these SA2s. The index is always reported at the SA2 resolution, and to understand other areas, say for example a whole region, you need to consider all of the SA2s within that region. So, given that context, how do you interpret the index and what does it say about disaster resilience? Disaster resilience, coping capacity and adaptive capacity is calculated as a number between 0 and 1. And we've put those values into classes of low, moderate and high capacity. Associated with each report that you generate is a key to those classes of high, moderate and low capacity. So here for disaster resilience, you can use that key to understand the capacity for disaster resilience in the different SA2s that you've selected. Similar keys are also generated for coping and adaptive capacity, and these describe how communities with higher coping capacity are better able to use available resources, and how communities with higher adaptive capacity are better able to adjust to change through learning, adaptation, and transformation. To look in more detail at the factors that contribute to disaster resilience in any one place, use the Disaster Resilience Factors page. This part of the research placed all of the SA2s in Australia into 5 groups, and each group has a unique disaster resilience profile, which allows you to be able to understand which places are alike in terms of their disaster resilience, strengths and barriers. So to learn about the meaning of each group, you need to look at some PDFs. To access those PDFs, generate a report. Then click on a group to open a PDF about that group in a new window. So there's a lot of very rich information in this document, so let me take you through it. The first page just describes the definitions of each of the factors. The second page is the important part. It shows that Group 1 has disaster resilience strengths contributed through emergency services, economic capital, planning in the built environment, information access, and governance and leadership. But Group 1 also has several barriers to disaster resilience contributed through community capital, social and community engagement, and social character. The text then describes what these strengths and barriers mean for coping with and adapting to natural hazards. And then the third page then lists all of the SA2s in Group 1, so it's easy to see that all of these places around Australia have those same strengths, but also face the same barriers to disaster resilience. The graphs in the Disaster Resilience Factors report then allow you to look in more detail at an individual SA2. The graphs show the values for each factor in comparison to the state and national medians for that group. So you can see that Burwood has higher community capital and social and community engagement than the other SA2s in that same group. But it sits pretty close to the medians for the other factors. So from these graphs, you can get an idea of the variation that occurs within groups. Even though a group is characterised by strengths and barriers overall, some factors may be particularly prominent in a particular place. You can also link through to the various research reports that are associated with the index. These reports summarise disaster resilience in Australia, but also go into much more detail about the conceptual model underlying the index and how the index was calculated.